But to me, it strikes that there's some misleading there, if not dishonesty.
This whole thing felt dishonest to me.
I don't know if they did this with the other Latter-day Saint creators they reached out to, but they specifically said that they were working with the church on this article. I mean, that's what they told me. And they even like name dropped names that I would know to kind of signal that like, this is okay. We're doing this with the church. They're okay with this. And then in the article, it said the church declined to comment.
The Wall Street Journal actually made errors, actually presented it in not a very journalistic way.
This episode is brought to you guys by ScriptureNotes.com, the coolest way of reading your scriptures online. For a free trial of Scripture Notes, please make sure you guys visit the links in the description. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to WardRadio. I'm your host, Cardin Ellis. Today I'm joined in the studio via Zoom by none other than Brad Whitbeck and Luke Hansen, as well as Jasmin Rappleye from her own channel. What's the name of your channel again? Is it just your name? Jasmin, what is it?
Jasmin Rappleye.
Okay, excellent. And unfortunately, Jasmin, and from what I understand, Elder TikTok, if I'm not mistaken, was a victim of a little hit piece today by none other than our friends, not today, but recently, by none other than our friends over at the Wall Street Journal. And a lot of people have been asking me to cover this and opine on this. I saw your video today, Jasmin. Before we jump in and we have our opinions, you can have your chance to be well measured and kind and give everybody the benefit of the doubt before I just lock and load with my mortars. You know what I'm saying? But tell us what happened and give us the backstory and give us your side of the story. Let's go.
Okay, well, victim of a hit piece, I think, is probably overstating it. So we'll just start off with measured right there.
Okay.
I was invited to be part of an article, and I was not the centerpiece of the article, and that is fine. So basically, this goes back several months. The Wall Street Journal published an article on Latter-day Saints on social media, specifically the Exmo phenomenon on social media, because I think it is pretty undeniable that Exmos have a sizable presence, specifically on TikTok, and they went pretty viral in like 2020. So the Wall Street Journal was very interested in that, and so they wanted to do a piece on it, and they wanted to talk to both Exmo creators, Latter-day Saint creators. And in the final piece, it was pretty heavily Exmo leaning. And then at the end, they included a few quotes from David Snell from Keystone, myself, and Elder TikTok. And but more than that, I like the biggest rub for me was the fact that they included imagery of sacred temple robes, which I expect from Exmo TikTok. I mean, that's pretty much 90% of the Exmo TikTok content, I feel like, a lot of the times. But I would have expected a little bit more decorum from mainstream media to respect the norms and just the sacred practices of Latter-day Saints. So that's the overview of what happened. As far as like the background of how we got there, so like I mentioned, I was reached out months ago about being part of this story. And the interesting thing was I was actually reached out by a Latter-day Saint reporter initially. He
Really?
was, yes. So he was originally assigned to do the story because he was a Latter-day Saint. And so I think that, there was overlap there. It'd be great to make sure that we've got, an accurate view of this faith. And so let's see. I'm trying to just pull it up. Okay. So the way it was originally pitched to me was, we're working on a story about the impact of social media on the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So just very broad, just Church of Jesus Christ, social media. That could go either way, negative or positive. And they were interested in getting insights from a variety of creators. They were going to interview a ton of them. So I don't know how many they actually interviewed and how many made it in the story. I have no context there. But we set up a time to do an interview. I don't remember exactly, but it was probably like a 40+ minute interview on Zoom. And then later on, this Latter-day Saint reporter got reassigned to like a different sector of the division of the Wall Street Journal, and so got taken off the story. And Georgia Wells, who is the current author of the article, finished it up. Now, I do think the story originated with her, and this Latter-day Saint reporter was just brought in to help to provide the Latter-day Saint perspective. But Georgia Wells finished the article and was the one to really spearhead it. And so then after this Latter-day Saint reporter was taken off, Georgia Wells contacted me again saying, I'd love to do another interview with you. In fact, I had like a couple phone calls and interviews with the first reporter, and then Georgia Wells came in and I did one interview with her over the phone. And it was, again, pretty broad, like, hey, we're really interested in the Exmo phenomenon, and we want to just talk about Latter-day Saint social media in general. We're going to talk to a lot of Exmo and Latter-day Saint creators, and we'd love your take. And so during the phone call, I mean, this was months ago, and so I have a hard time remembering these specific details, but there was a lot of like, you know, what's your take on the social media space right now? What are you seeing a lot of? And I believe I talked about how like we are seeing a growth, a surge of independent Latter-day Saint creators just organically wanting to join the fray, and talked about my own motivations for wanting to share. And originally I was working for Scripture Central, so I talked about how originally it was part of my job, but I didn't start like posting on TikTok and showing my face until like I felt personally called to do so. And I felt like this compulsion to want to actually stand up for the church, and how that evolved. And now I'm doing it on my own platform, and talked about the motives of Latter-day Saint creators and like why they're doing that, and the church's role in that. They asked questions about like, is the church, I don't know if they asked like, is the church paying influencers? Because this was before the influencer ad agency scandal. But they did ask questions about like, do you know like what the church's relationship with influencers are, or these other nonprofit organizations? And like, I didn't really comment very much there, but they seem to like want to know more about that. Like, why isn't the church doing like what these other nonprofit organizations are doing for conservative speakers or Democratic influencers and things like that? And so like, I had no idea like where the angle of the story was going to go. I had no idea like what they were going to do with that, but you know, I was happy to just share my experience the best I could. And they said at the time, like again, months ago, that like latest, if this ends up in like a print edition, it might end up in May, might be when the story comes out. And I'm like, oh, wow, that's kind of a long cooking article. But then it turned out being September. So I don't know exactly like what interrupted all of the, like what caused the delay or anything like that. But came out on Tuesday or Wednesday, something like that of this week. And there was a lot of slant against Latter-day Saints. The article really focused a lot on the validity of these ex-Mormon experiences, and it exposed like there's these problems with the church that these creators had. It wasn't like, if I'm being very fair, like I feel like if you were doing a piece and you set out to do a piece on the Exmo phenomenon and doing their perspective, and then you wanted to just have like a little Latter-day Saint color in it, you know, maybe that accomplished that goal. But that's not exactly how it was presented to me. And I shouldn't be surprised, I should say, from the media, but that was basically my experience.
Okay, so this is where I get a little defensive. All right, because I notice there's, to me, a frustrating phenomenon going on. We spoke to the lovely Polynesian woman, Juliet, and Mallory, who are totally, completely trapped and baited and switched onto the Dr. Daff show. I don't know if you happen to see that live stream, but
So I was actually invited on there. I didn't watch the episode, but they reached out like 4 days before they were planning to film it and said, hey, can you come and be on this episode? And I said, I can't really fly out to California in 4 days. Sorry. And so that's how that ended.
Okay, well, at the end of the day, I asked them the question because it was obvious that those girls did not sign up for an apologetic smackdown, but they got one. I mean, Mallory, this poor girl, shows up in like tennis shoes and jean shorts after, you know, going to swim school with kids. And then Juliet's just like a nice woman who looks like she'd barely just finished a home teaching lesson before she came over to the studio. And before she knows it, she has like these two apologists just breathing down her neck. It became plainly obvious to me that, hey, is this what you signed up for? And they said, heck fuck no. Like, we felt completely duped. So after reading this article by the Wall Street Journal and knowing you now for quite some time, okay, I mean, it's not like we're besties and we hang out on the weekends together, but I feel like I know Jasmine's personality pretty well. She's well measured. She doesn't like taking things out of context. She's not into controversy. I read this and I didn't get past the first page before I thought, there's no way she knew what she was getting into. Would you feel comfortable saying what this ended up becoming was what you felt you were getting into?
No, except for the sense that, like, I'm generally fairly skeptical of journalists, and I kind of assumed that, like, okay, I know this is what they're saying. I don't know what they're going to do with this. There's a good chance it's not going to be positive, and I just have to be okay with that. But as far as what they presented and what I would assume what they would have done with that, yeah, it was not. Well, that expectation was not met.
When we just look at the headline and the subheadline, I don't know. It to me, and if the writer of the article doesn't want to come off this way, then maybe they can make some adjustments. But when I hear Exmo influencers mount a TikTok war against the Mormon Church, and then the subheadline of the church is facing a 21st century reckoning driven by social media, and it is racing to counter the narrative. It kind of tells me what bias they have. It tells me what side they like and what side they're going to privilege. And oh boy, did the article do that. It went on to spend at least 80% of the time highlighting ex-Mormon voices and saying why they're right. And then threw a tiny bit of a bone at the very end to the remaining people on the church positive side. Again, setting it up as though they were only there because the church paid them to be there. As if no one is actually defending the church because they want to be, right? And so, I don't know. I thought this article was very, very one-sided and just seemed to be rooting for Team Exmo, you know? And which is like, hey, if that's what you're going to want to do, like, that's how it comes across. If that's not what you intended, maybe consider rewording things.
Well, also known as a hit piece.
Like, even the selection of me as a voice, you could even argue was a little bit of a bias because I was paid by Scripture Central and a nonprofit organization. And part of what I did was to create content. It wasn't my full-time job, but part of my responsibilities were creating content. Whereas there are several hundred Latter-day Saint creators right now on YouTube and Instagram and TikTok who are not getting paid a dime for this or just doing it out of the goodness of their heart. And so, you know, you could even argue that just like selecting the one person who was being paid at the time is, you know,
and who
not
has been
representative.
vocal about being paid for it, right? Like, this is, I mean, it just rubs me the wrong way because I think it paints a pretty false picture of what's actually going on.
Well, also, you want to talk about getting paid? You know who's getting paid? Anti-Mormons, not the Mormons. Like, Jasmin is barely, like, she's a young mother. They're providing for a family in a very modest living, so on and so forth. They're not raking down $500,000 plus with pension and whatnot like John DeLynn is. Alyssa Grenfeld, her RPM, she disclosed it. Luke, you remember when she talked about her RPM, right?
Yeah, she disclosed it a year and a half ago or so-ish, and I think she said that it was 12.
Yeah.
And so if you go to her video...
it was between $11 and $12. So I only know this because I did a video on this specifically where I tried to dive in, like, okay, if she's getting an RPM of 11 or 12, and assuming that's representative, which it can change, and, you know, the RPMs go down over time and all of that stuff, but only, like, counting the videos she has published in the last 12 months and just counting those long form views, I mean, that RPM is around, like, is well over 200K a year. And that's not counting like residual views from previous years, shorts views, TikTok views, paid ads, Patreon. I mean, that's, you know, that's a sizable amount of money.
Dude, that's a huge chunk of change. And they want to talk about how, like, oh, some influencer that might have gotten $5,000 once for a couple of posts from some ad agency that happened to score a contract with Bonneville Communications. We literally call it the influencer scandal when it's not a scandal. Like, we call in Mormonism, we so adopt the language of our oppressors and we say, oh, well, back when this scandal happened, and it wasn't even a scandal, it was like a nothing burger to the rest of the world, but we just actually allow them to manipulate our nomenclature so badly that we actually say these things. But I mean, you want to insinuate that somehow Jasmine's doing something wrong, Elder TikTok's doing something wrong, Brad's doing something wrong or whatever. Take a look at the gross amount of money that Alyssa Grinfeld gets to do what I think all of us would admit is at best a social norm violation, at worst an egregious sacrilege, dressing up in the temple clothing. I bet you if we were to go to any college campus and interview every white 20-something girl on campus and say, hey, if there was a local, Indian tribe that had a sacred dress that was only supposed to be worn during the fire dance with other elders in, the wigwam or whatever the indigenous term is. And, an ex-member of that religion were to steal it and then go jump in it on Hollywood Boulevard, mocking the dance and mocking the Indian tribe. And then the Wall Street Journal would actually make an article of that. Would you consider that like taboo, or would that be cool? They would be aghast. They would be absolutely aghast. Okay, then why is it cool for her to do it in rollerblades down Salt Lake City, Salt Lake Avenue? It's such an absolute blind spot that is just like cruel hypocrisy in my mind. I'm with you that that's one of the biggest things that bothers me.
I was scanning through Grenfell's videos. She puts out one video a week, and for the past year, 1 in 5 videos have been temple clothes pictures on the thumbnail.
Wow.
Really? 1 in 5?
Like 1 in 5, yeah.
Well,
oh my God.
Approximately.
I mean, it gets a lot of clicks. It's very much a spectacle. It's something that it's a visual hook, grabs your attention, and it's very bizarre to see in your normal day life. And so it's easy to want to capitalize on that. But that definitely for me was the thing that I was most disappointed in, just that they would display the temple robes like that. I expected of Exmos. I would have expected more of the Wall Street Journal. And like you said, I think there is a bit of a double standard when it comes to other religions in our faith. Now, our counter argument I hear against that is there's no other religion that has sacred clothing that we're not allowed to photograph or not allowed to see. Therefore, it's not a valid complaint. Or I've also heard,
Muhammad,
that exactly
how you're not allowed to depict him.
There is imagery and iconography in other religions that is sacred that they're not supposed to depict. And that would include, images of the Prophet Muhammad. And if the Wall Street Journal were to start posting photos of that because they wanted to talk to ex-Muslims, I think that would cause problems. And not to mention, other people will claim that there's you can't complain about people are allowed to wear whatever they want. Like the church can't regulate if ex-Mormons want to wear their temple robes in different ways. And, that's true. I can't force them to not do that, but we can ask for respect. And I don't think that's out of the question.
Dude. So, what's the fallout of this? I had a couple of questions. One, do you think this was motivated by anti-Mormonism or just cult porn sensationalism? Because it's weird. You know how there's Mormons everywhere? I could go get a job at Merrill Lynch in some strange town. Let's just say I just got a job at Merrill Lynch in Chicago. Of 100 cubicles, 2 of those guys are going to be Mormon. 3 of them are going to be Mormon. We're 1% of the population, but 3% of any big company or successful venture is always Mormons. We're always overrepresented in Congress and NASA and all these other places, right? Well, frankly, I've noticed so is ex-Mormonism. It's amazing to me how many people just have an axe to grind against the church for no real apparent reason. And I don't our faith is still so small and so obscure that I could see why it would be interesting to highlight the fact that there's a battle going on online. But the tone and the tenor of this article seemed like there was somebody with an axe to grind. In your experience with this article, did you sense somebody had an axe to grind, or do you think this is literally just natural consequences of sensationalism?
I never sensed that within the interview. Granted, again, reporters tend to be a lot more complimentary when you talk to them in person than what they're planning to print. But at the same time, I don't necessarily sense that this is just an animus as much as Mormonism. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is in the news a lot. We're in the media a lot. It draws a lot of attention and it gets a lot of clicks, and it does have a lot of there's a curiosity gap there when it comes to the church. And so when a reporter is trying to find a story and they're coming across the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints because of Secret Lives or because of Heretic or because of American Primeval or whatever it is, and if they start searching and digging, the first thing they're going to find is Exmo content, not Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints content. So I think it is pretty easy to just get into that rabbit hole. And so I would just guess this was just recency bias of, they're doing research and they come across Exmo stuff, and that's kind of the narrative that sticks. If I had to guess, I don't know.
Okay. And then
I think a large part of it has to do with how much our current social media just rewards negativity. Our algorithms completely push forward stuff that's rage bait, and it makes it so that, oh, hey, we got a ton of comments on this thing. And when we go and comment on the things, it kind of kills me that we're doing it right now in a way, interacting about this article that is now getting more viewers and more people looking at it because of the things that are said in it. It annoys me because it works. It's rage bait, and people will go in, and faithful people will comment to say, hey, could you please be kinder to us? And people who aren't faithful will comment and say, yeah, this is totally great, And so it's a very, very frustrating thing to look at and see just how much I think this anti-content gets pushed. And also, I just want to share a couple of reasons why I think this is happening. First off, criticism's super easy. So much easier to just throw out BS than it is to go out. What is it? It's whose law is it?
Are you talking about a lie goes around the world before the truth puts its pants on?
It's Brandolini's law. The amount of energy necessary to refute BS is an order of magnitude bigger than it is to produce it, right? So by virtue of Brandolini's law, I think we see a ton of critical content that is just able to be thrown out there. A lot of it is also just your experience, right? So why not? I think it is, we've seen established creators that have made it easy for algorithms to know which audiences to funnel in, right? So people like John DeLynn and people like Cults to Consciousness, these are existing groups that oh, hey, if we have an audience here, they may also like these other things, right? Third reason, I think it's really easy to monetize. Like you guys talked about, they have a really high return on their 1,000 views. I think another thing is that Mormon content is interesting, and the anti-Mormon angle comes with some super simple hooks and framing that have been refined over decades. This is not stuff that these people just came up with. This is stuff that has been, oh, hey, well, E.D. Howe had all of these things that he said, and a lot of these fell flat, but you know what? These two still survive, right? And you get the absolute greatest hits of all of the Exmo content is what's still being replayed. All the stuff that does eventually die out, they tend to drop or ignore or rediscover for a second and then be like, oh, well, I guess it does get shot down pretty quick. And oh yeah, as a bonus, we're a persecutable minority religion, right? So we're generally being attacked by people who have left the minority religion and joined the majority, right? Generally atheists or traditional Christians. And so the framing of that, it makes it so that it's hey, now these insiders are going to tell you the narrative that you want to hear, right? The majority, or these people agree with you now. It's I don't like it. I don't think it's very good, but it makes sense why it's happening, right? It's just a natural consequence of people leaving this group and joining a larger group that has a larger audience.
Well, I got a question for you, Luke and Jasmin, simultaneously. Maybe I'm just a hyper practical person. Maybe I'm just such a typical male that always wants to fix things instead of listen or whatever, right? But what do we do? What do we do about this? Because I was talking with Ben Rogers the other day, Dr. Monhotva on Twitter. And I can't remember who he quoted. It wasn't Sun Tzu. It was some other military tactician. But I just remember the quote. He said, do you know who always loses? And I was like, who? And he says, the people that just want to be left alone always lose. And I just think, I kind of feel like that's Mormons. Members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, yes, we want to share. We're big on inviting. We'll even go serve service missions and so on and so forth. But we're not convert or die people. This isn't like the wars that raged among Western Europe in the Middle Ages. This isn't the galloping hordes and the conquests of the 8th century in the Middle East, right? Like, we're like, hey, do you want to come to church? We're having a basketball game. You know, like that's what we do, right? But by and large, especially when it comes to like media exposure and things like that, we want to be left alone. We love to have our chapel and our congregation, our slow growth through baptism of people that are actually asking legitimate questions about God. But the normies, look, if religion's not for you, that's fine. You know, we've got eternities to progress. Like, this concept of eternal progression very much does, in a certain way, kind of neuter some of that urgency in a good way, right? And so we're the ones that just want to be left alone. But like, the Wall Street Journal would never do this about Muslims because they're afraid of the repercussions. They see the most radical aspects that happen overseas, and that informs their decisions domestically. And I guarantee you, Muslims would not have put up with a mockery of Muhammad in the United States of America. And so as much as I get we're not Muslim, we're Christian, and it's part of our ethos to turn the other cheek and so on and so forth, I can't stand back and look at how we're treated and not think that it's a deficiency in our culture of not fighting back enough. And I know that President Nelson said, be peacemakers and all that other stuff, but like, does peacemaking literally require that we just be okay with people just posting horrendously sacrilegious and disrespectful mockeries of our temple clothing? Like, do we have to do what we would never require of our Muslim friends to really fulfill that Christian commission? Or is there something wrong with us?
I think there's probably a multi-pronged approach. I think some people are going to resonate with different approaches better than others. My bias is towards the peacemaking, not just because President Nelson published an article with Time Magazine just today where he talked about it, but I do think it's tactical. I think it's strategic sometimes. Not all the time, but sometimes. I think that people, the more, defensive or combative you get, people can put up walls. And as someone who has recently dealt with a lot of backlash on like social media posts I had made about the church's approach to abuse, I got a lot of backlash for that. And I'm just like, as I'm reacting to my own experience dealing with that, there were strong emotions. It was not fun to grapple with. But when people were attacking me and were fighting back and were saying this is awful, this is wrong, and all those things, was I more likely to agree with them because of that? Or was I more likely to like put up my own wall in defense? And it really is the people who were willing to reach out in like grace, charity, kindness, compassion, that could then also like share their perspective of how they might disagree. It was those people I was more likely to listen to than the people who were shouting very loudly at me. And so in my own experience in like work situations, professional experiences, personal relationships, the more I can actually have like a compassionate, charitable conversation with someone, the more likely I'm going to make inroads with them. And that's just my own experience.
I would say, I don't think being a peacemaker requires us being fine with people mocking our sacred things. I think it encourages us to do things like get curious, not furious. And instead of saying, you insane lunatic, why would you do this? Say something like, hey, what makes you think it's okay to post things like this? And ask good questions to get to the bottom of understanding why they're doing things that way. Maybe that question even comes off as combative to some people, but I think the goal should be something like what President Nelson shared in this article today. I loved his wording on this, and I think it's a really good test for us. And it's to ask ourselves whether we're fostering empathy or enmity. And I think that's a really good thing to ask ourselves with like what we're about to say and what we're about to post and how we're about to respond to somebody. Is it the kind of thing that fosters empathy or enmity? Does it bring further understanding, or does it drive a divide between us that says, hey, you're the enemy now and you're a bad person and you should feel bad, right? Like, what kind of things do we let drive our actions and how we interact?
I loved that quote. From the Time article that was released today, President Nelson said, "A century of experience has taught me this with certainty. Anger never persuades, hostility never heals, and contention never leads to lasting solutions. Too much of today's public discourse, especially online, fosters enmity instead of empathy," which is what you were talking about. And I think that really is very cool. Now, like I said, I think sometimes there's a multi-pronged approach and some people are going to resonate with different tactics. But in my experience, I've found his words to hold some water that, you know, a lot of times anger puts up walls and it doesn't break them down. And so the more we can have, you know, just charitable conversations, doesn't mean we can't disagree, doesn't mean we can't stand up for our beliefs and what, you know, our own dignity. But we also need to just make sure we keep in mind the dignity of others and that everyone is walking this planet Earth trying to do the best they can.
And I would even say that when we respond with anger, a lot of times we'll just get people to dig in their heels, right? And I think that the more that I've studied his talks about peacemaking recently, the more I've started to realize, okay, part of the reason we need to be peacemakers is because nothing else actually works. Like the beginning of that quote you shared says, like, hostility never persuades. Is that how it goes?
Anger never persuades, hostility never heals, contention never leads to lasting solutions.
Yeah, I think he's absolutely correct. Like, the reason that we need to be peacemakers outside of it's what God has asked us to do, I think God has only asked us to do this because it's what actually works, right? If we're pushovers and we just let people just walk all over us all the time, we haven't changed anything about them. We haven't changed their hearts in any way. And we haven't let them know that what they did hurt us and that what they're saying and the way that they're behaving is actually painful for us. They don't know if we just try to pretend that it wasn't bad. But if we react with anger and say, "Oh, you guys are the worst for having done these things," then we might just make them dig in their heels and say, "Oh, you know what? No, I'm right." Or we just shut them down and they still believe what they believed, even though we never really got to an understanding, right? So I think there's a lot of that in this peacemaking that President Nelson's asking us to do. He's asking us to do it because it is the only method that's really effective.
Okay, now that you pansies are all done. No, I'm totally just kidding. Oh man, I hate these lessons in church where I'm just like, "Duh." Look,
I'll jump in then.
Okay, hit it.
If you're feeling like it's too nice, I do think it would be appropriate in an instance like this to cancel a Wall Street Journal subscription and kind of like let them know why you're canceling it, which is a little ironic that I'm suggesting this because just this morning I dropped a video on Doctrine and Governance about how Latter-day Saints shouldn't have been canceling the Daily Wire.
Okay.
And I think they were wrong to do that because it's a matter of, look, the Wall Street Journal, as Jasmin said, it's an actual, like, this was a journal piece. They worked on it for months. They had apparently all the time in the world to get together their sources. And then they put up something like Alyssa Grenfell and the Temple Robes as like on an actual journal piece. And then and lots of other problems with it. Like, I'll point out that they had like the religious scholars saying, "Oh yeah, the Mormons, out of all the Christian organizations or apart compared to many others, they have a retention problem." And then you look at the data, and I put it up in the Discord, Cardin, 2021 to 2023 Latter-day Saints top church attendance statistics. And so it's not so much that they have a retention problem. It's just that Latter-day Saints are a lot more likely to say that they're not Latter-day Saints anymore after they go inactive versus other Christians who still say that they're Christian, but they don't do anything about it. It's just kind of cultural. And so just like that kind of laziness, that kind of flippancy, almost the treating the sacred in a very profane way, or at least it's sacred to us, not having that respect, I think that's valid to cancel the Wall Street Journal over. Not because you're angry, not because we're trying to be contentious, just like you guys are not conducting yourself properly as a journalistic institution. It's fine if you want to make articles that have critiques of the church. That's fine. And I think that's where people went wrong with the Cabot thing, is that Cabot in his own personal capacity on Twitter said something about he made a couple of historically ignorant claims, and then he shared his personal belief that Latter-day Saints have a salvation problem because they're believing the wrong things. That's not something to cancel somebody over unless you're reading bad intentions into what Cabot's doing. The Wall Street Journal actually made errors, actually presented it in not a very journalistic way. And so it's appropriate to cancel them there. But Jasmine, I think you had something to say.
In addition to maybe the slant of the article, which I mostly am fine with, like that's their prerogative, how they want to angle a story. I know that's how mainstream media goes. But it's the temple robes. But the other thing that I felt like was unprofessional was, again, setting up the expectation. And I don't know if they did this with the other Latter-day Saint creators they reached out to, but they specifically said that they were working with the church on this article. I mean, that's what they told me. And they even like name dropped names that I would know to kind of signal that like, this is okay. We're doing this with the church. They're okay with this. And then in the article, it said the church declined to comment. So I don't know the backstory of exactly what happened with the church. I don't claim to speak for the church. I don't have firsthand knowledge of this. But to me, it strikes that there's some misleading there, if not dishonesty, about what the relationship with the church to this article was. Either the church was heavily involved and they did provide a lot of great context, and then the Wall Street Journal decided to disregard that and say, no, the church declined to comment, or they lied about the church's involvement in the article in order to encourage Latter-day Saints to participate in the story, but in reality, the church was not involved. So either way, there's something that I felt like that was not done well from a professional standpoint.
Can I call them liars now,
I think
Jasmine?
it's important that they know that feels dishonest, you know? Like whatever their intentions were, that kind of stuff, it feels dishonest. And if you don't do anything to try to remedy that, then that's going to be the impression you leave, is some form of dishonesty, whether that's what they wanted to do or not. What were you saying, Carden?
Oh, I was just saying Austin Falter sent me an AI prompt for ChatGPT here, and all I have to do is type in what Carden wants to say, and then it pumps out what Jasmine would say. So I wanted to say the Wall Street Journal is a liar in all caps and exclamation mark. And then here it says, Jasmine will say, it was very disappointing to see that I was led to think I was participating in a different set of parameters for the discussion of this journal article than the ones that ended up being published. But see, you're so well measured, Jasmine. This is why everybody likes you and you're awesome. So I'm going to call them liars and it a hit piece. But in respect for Jasmine, I'll tone it down and I'll just say a disappointing missed opportunity. How about that? Is that better?
That's excellent. Thank you.
Okay, sweet. I feel like I'm going to some kind of like anger management class just on this podcast with Jasmine. I get really defensive of my friends, Jasmine, and I would consider you a friend. We're both trying to build the kingdom in this odd space of the bloggernacle. And I don't know, it just really bothered me because I feel like you didn't get what you signed up for. And just like Brad said, it kind of seems dishonest. This whole thing felt dishonest to me. So that's where I stand. And I even wore my, this is only the second time I ever worn this shirt, but I wore it today in honor of Jasmine. In my last ward, there was one of the Baywatch babes was in my ward from like the 90s. She's like a mom now with a bunch of kids, but she's friends with David Hasselhoff. So he signed these "Don't Mess with the Hoff" shirts.
Don't hassle the Hoff.
Or don't hassle the Hoff, right? And I thought we got to make one for Jasmine and Tao Tai now.
Oh, gosh.
Don't hassle Jasmine, or else don't mess, or don't jazz the Jasmine, or don't, I don't know, what's a word, what's an alliteration that starts with a J? You know, but anyway,
Nothing
yes.
good.
Yeah, nothing good. That's funny. So anyway, any final thoughts before we get out of here? Any final thoughts? Luke, Brad, anybody got anything to say before we jam?
Yeah, there was something I was thinking of with all of this. One of the things that I was kind of disappointed to see, because I felt like if this is about the rise in stuff we're seeing on TikTok, surely this is going to mention how 5 years ago we all got shut inside and everyone started making content, right? And like when people can't go outside, suddenly we're both consuming and creating more content. And it didn't even address that in any way, shape, or form. It made it seem as though this is like something completely just, oh yeah, all of these people are waking up to how bad the church is, when in reality, people have been leaving the church since the beginning. We're monetizing it and publicizing it in a very different way because our world has fundamentally changed. It's an interesting thing to see, and that's the interesting side of things that I'm interested in exploring more. Like, don't take a side in this culture war and try to like beef up the one that you are commiserate with more a little bit. Let's try to look at why is this happening and wonder what's going on. Because I think there's an interesting thing where there are a lot of people out there who have some form of religious trauma, right? And so it becomes instantly relatable for them to go and piggyback onto ex-Mormon content because like, hey, yeah, church bad, therefore this person is now saying this church is bad. And like in some ways, the LDS church is becoming like the symbol of religion everywhere, you know, and it's a mockable one. So, hey, let's go and do that. And so it's interesting to see how that plays out. And I'm more fascinated in exploring how that is happening and what's going on with the effect of us being more engaged on social media. And hopefully, if there's a way to explore that in a way that increases empathy for one another. Because I'm not interested in going out here and being like, every person who's ever made something critical of the church is evil, and here's why. I want to see, okay, how do we get to an empathetic place? How do we get to an understanding with one another so that we can actually build bridges with one another and not be attacking each other all the time or dehumanizing one another? I want to see us use social media in a way that helps encourage understanding. So that's kind of my last words on this. I feel like the article unfortunately had a missed opportunity and didn't do that.
Well, dude,
it just seemed to be picking a side in a culture war and saying this is the side that's good, and then, oh yeah, here's what some of these other people had to say too. But hopefully moving forward, we can make something better.
Okay, so you're saying I shouldn't bring up the picture of Georgia Wells after I clicked on the name to see what else she's written and not notice that it says Georgia Wells is a technology reporter for the Wall Street Journal based in San Francisco, where she covers the uses and abuses of social media. I'd say beating up in a biased hit piece against people that like can that's an abuse in itself of social media. And then she continues to say she's written on the toxic mental health effects of Instagram on some teen girls, TikTok's role in shaping culture, and young people trying to change social media. The only people in this conversation that have talked about being peacemakers and being nice, ironically, have been the Mormons on this Zoom right here, you know, not the lady abusing members by misrepresenting their faith by proxy through people that hate us and only inviting active voices to participate in order to tokenize them and legitimize the article as somehow being both-sided. Brad, I can tell you want to say something before I jump.
Oh, I just thought it was really interesting the way that she approached the article, the writing of it completely casts the ex-Mormon content, everyone making ex-Mormon content, as people. But it makes everyone who speaks for the church, it treats them as this other that is church only, right?
Yeah.
It literally sets up this war as though it is ex-Mo, like rebels fighting against this big institutional church. And here's like one or two voices of that institutional church, rather than treating Jasmin as a human being or Elder TikTok as a human being. Like, you guys are very different people, you and Elder TikTok.
Really?
Like, with very different seeming motivations and approaches to how you make your content. I don't think that they needed to do that. And it makes me wonder why they ended up framing it that way.
So
Well, there's something
run-
that we can agree with Georgia, and that's the fact that she thinks that TikTok can have a deleterious effect on teens' mental health. I would agree with that.
Absolutely.
And I think specifically ex-Smo content can exacerbate that, not because of anything like about these humans or individuals, but when your entire content creation and all of your content consumption is fundamentally about negative and tearing something down, I think that is going to be hard on your mental health. And so I would tend to think that you need to balance that, whether you believe in the church or not. Like, I think you need to balance out your social media consumption with things that build up, not just things that tear down.
okay.
Absolutely.
So anyway, guys, let us know what you guys think in the comments below. Did we get a little bit railroaded here? Was there a little bit of a bait and switch going on? What were your impressions when you read the article? If anybody feels they have been misrepresented in this episode, please feel free to reach out on wardradio.com. We will gladly give you a voice. If you guys want to support the channel, please check out the War in Heaven veteran hats or shirts that are available in the merch store. If you want to contribute directly to the channel, please check us out on Zelle or Venmo. Before we go, Jasmin, where can people find you if they want to see your stuff and they like to see more of you? Where do you want to send them?
Jasmin Rappleye on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, or X.
Okay, and it's spelled Rappleye, one word, right?
Yes, Rappleye.
Okay,
it's pronounced Rappleye.
Okay, that's cool. Awesome. People actually ask me that quite often, believe it or not. So anyway, thanks for hanging out with us, guys. For this and more, please check us out at WardRadio.com.